So, all right, well, we'll go ahead and kick things off. I see it's 102, and the number of people who have joined has started to stabilize a little bit. So, first of all, thank you everyone for taking time out of your Thursday to join Taylor and I to talk about kind of the way that we're thinking and reimagining cloud strategy along with our customers. Um, Couple things just for awareness. The session will be recorded. You will also receive a copy of the presentation after things have concluded. Also, once we conclude today, there will be a survey that will pop up right directly from GoToWebinar that you can all fill out. And then the last piece here is our marketing team will be putting links to calendar scheduling for Taylor and I in the event that you're interested in seeing a live version of the pricing calculator, which we're about to show you. So with that said, I will get into the content here, and I'll Taylor hand it off to you for a quick introduction.
Yeah, thanks, David. Hi, everybody. My name's Taylor Greiner, newly the Director of Innovation here at US Signal. Had to catch myself not using my old title. If you've worked with me over the last few years, I was our Microsoft specialist supporting a lot of the sales efforts. I've rolled over to a new challenge on the R&D side, really trying to help bring innovative products to the market, both on really kind of the entire portfolio. Just to give everybody some background, I've spent the last 12 years of my career in cloud and software development primarily, whether it was hands-on the keyboard engineer, product, sales, I've kind of done it all. Started my career in DSIM software or data center infrastructure monitoring and power and cooling, did a bunch of consulting and found myself at One Neck, now US Signal. Kind of a fun fact, I actually, out of college, founded a company that developed DSIM software and found out once I came over here, US Signal is a customer of that product. So that was kind of cool. And then I'm located in the a suburb of Des Moines, Iowa. So if you're close, let's grab lunch. If you're not, I try to make it out to as many of our areas as possible. Would love to meet as many people in person as I can.
Awesome, that's
David?
great. Yeah. Welcome to your new role in R&D, which is great. So Taylor and his team help engineer the products that my team then build that then we go and bring to market. So Taylor and I are talking on a multi times a day basis at this point.
Oh yeah.
So a little bit about me, David Humes. I'm the vice president of product development here at US Signal. Been with the company for a little, well, I guess coming up on 2 years is maybe a better way to say it. I actually came from a competitor of ours who I think might actually be on the webinar potentially. And I've spent the last 7 years of my career really on the service provider side, the US Signal side, but actually have spent the majority of my career on the customer side. So I was actually a customer purchasing cloud services, network connectivity, backup services from a company just like US Signal. So what we try and do here at Signal, for sure in product and R&D, is really bring our customers along the journey. And so what we're going to share today is really a snapshot into some of the conversations we've been having with our customers that we think are potentially relevant to a broader audience. Again, on the customer side, I really worked predominantly in manufacturing. Worked for a company that we built cutting boards, outdoor furniture, and did architectural distribution. And then we also built other company I worked for. We built wheeled material handlers for scrapyards in partnership with Caterpillar. And again, my responsibility is all things product. And I live up in Duluth, Minnesota, into cars, live on a lake. So that becomes my identity, and extremely into home automation, as my wife will probably begrudgingly tell you. So I know, as I mentioned, there's kind of a wide swath of folks that are on the call today. I know we have people who are existing customers of US Signal. Thank you for being customers. I know we have customers who are maybe prospective net new for us. And then I know we may have some competitors as well. So just to give you kind of a high level overview of the organization, because we've changed a bit in the last 18 months to 2 years. And so I think even if you're a current customer, this is maybe relevant. So as many of you know, established in 2001, based in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Um, we really view our business through two key lenses, two key core competencies, which is really connectivity, which is really our legacy and now modernized fiber business, and then it's really the data center and everything that encompasses the data center inside those four walls. And then we really view things like security, managed services, and cloud as one step adjacencies from those two cores. Obviously, today we're going to be talking predominantly around cloud, but I'd be remiss to not mention things like our security services, network services, so on and so forth. Um, as Taylor mentioned, he came from the 1X side of the house. As we brought these two companies together over the last year, that's really meant we now have 16 national data centers. We're actually under construction with two expansions of edge data centers in Des Moines and Detroit, as well as some micro data centers, which are essentially, think like a carrier hut, but a little bit bigger with some racks of colo inside of them. Uh, Historically, we have 9,500 route miles of fiber. We're currently under construction for another 1,000, which is pretty exciting. And as a current customer would know, we still maintain the same level of service out of predominantly Grand Rapids, but now distributed with our technical operations center, where you can get somebody in 30 seconds or less who can help you. So that's a little bit about Signal. And then I really wanted to start today to talk about what we want you all to get out of this. Ideally, if we do our jobs, you are able to take this away. I'm not going to read it, but I think it's fair to say the cloud market in the last, let's say, 18 to 24 months has really been in a bit of a sea change. In my point, I think we've hit an inflection point. We're sort of starting to get to the other side of that, and I think it's two ways. It's obviously there's been a lot of shakeups in the virtualization ecosystem, a la Broadcom and VMware. And I know that's caused a lot of challenges for a lot of organizations, and that's actually part of why we built our OpenCloud product, which we'll talk about a little bit. And then the second thing is there's this massive success of organizations like AWS and Microsoft Azure, and we view ourselves as friends of both of those organizations, but we do believe that there's optionality emerging in really the open source space. And that's what we're going to primarily focus on today. And again, through our lens, open source is really our open cloud platform, which is based on Apache CloudStack and KVM. But you all as enterprises may have other experiences or other platforms you're looking at. We're just sharing it from our perspective. And so that's really what we're here, to do today. We think that open source, really offers that long-term cost certainty, right? It's not free, but it is part of the community, and so there's no sort of organization looking at moving costs. We think it provides a key source for innovation. So if you're running on a VMware vCloud Director platform today, we think that does great. We have hundreds of customers that run on that platform. But we'll talk a little bit today about why we think OpenCloud is different and is in fact more advanced and maybe a better option for a lot of our customers. And then obviously the pervasive security challenges, which I think we'll touch on. Taylor, just on this topic, any other takeaways you want to touch on? Otherwise, we can move on.
No, I think you hit it really well. I agree. There's a massive paradigm shift. We're seeing it. I think all of our customers are seeing it. Whether you're with Broadcom, whether you're with a hyperscaler, there's starting to be a change of best practice, and so it's really exciting times to be kind of at the forefront of that with open source, with the data centers, the fiber. It's fun times.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, as with all presentations, we wanted to start with stating our beliefs in put the stake in the ground. And we know that not everybody may agree with these, but hopefully what we show today really backs up these four main points. And so Taylor and I are going to kind of tag team this a little bit, but the first one, which probably seems like table stakes, and it certainly has been table stakes as long as IT has been IT, right? But it's really viewing infrastructure really actually through the lens of the business. So it's really choosing the right workload and putting it in the right place versus deciding on the place and then choosing your application. And so we really believe that most organizations, and indeed having talked to most of our customers, running in a true multi-cloud environment where they have things like Salesforce and M365 for their SaaS platforms. They may be using things like Azure for business analytics or AI factories or things like that, and then running infrastructure on private clouds. So that's the ecosystem that we believe, and our product set essentially backs up what we've just stated here. But again, we think that in our space, particularly, a lot of our competitors view those other places as sort of enemies, and we say, hey, we're here to support the needs of the business. So that's belief number one. Taylor?
Yeah. Second belief really is that open source is the future, right? We believe it offers long-term stability. You get the cost control because it's out in the community, right? I can go to really any open source project. I can go look at a Git repo or the source code, and I can do with it really kind of as I please. So very, very kind of exciting times when we look at historically, kind of the closed, the walled in gardens, right, where we don't have access to the source code. We don't necessarily understand what is going on under the hood, and we don't have the ability to kind of do with it as we please, right? Organizations may say, hey, you have to switch to this new version. We're deprecating these features, not even necessarily for security reasons. With open source, you have options, right? And I think that's the biggest thing, is that it just puts control back in you as the end user's hands. I think
Absolutely.
another,
Yeah.
yeah, real quick, I think kind of the elephant in the room with open source, I think it's moving away from this, but you still run into the conversation around, is it more or less secure? Um, the big thing there is that open source continually actually proves to be more secure. Uh, the CVEs or any kind of 0 days or anything like that get resolved faster because there is a community around this, right? And I think there's a perception that a lot of these open source projects are individual programmers in their basement, and there's no real um, kind of governance around these. But if you look at some of the organizations that are contributing to these projects, right, whether it's through the Cloud Native Compute Foundation, the Linux Foundation, the Apache Foundation, right, the largest technology companies are contributing back to these open source projects because so much of their business is actually built on these projects, right? So, as we're talking and we talk about KVM or we talk about Apache CloudStack, right? It's important to recognize that the largest technology companies in the world are also players in this tool space, but we as a service provider get to take advantage of the contributions back, and we've actually started contributing back. There's some exciting work being done in the cloud stack space. So
Yeah.
open source is the future.
Absolutely. And I think that answers the question of why open source in general. And then just to be very clear on my perspective, at least on why US Signal chose open source, is like when we first learned about all the changes that were happening with VMware, actually really before they were officially out there, but there were rumblings, out on the internet, we went and stood up a tiger team of the smartest engineers in the organization. And we said, hey, we have this challenge, let's go explore. And we looked at closed source options, we look at open source options, we've looked at mature platforms, immature platforms. And ultimately, the calculus for us at least was we're in a unique position because we're providing these services like VMware to our customers. But part of our ability to provide that service is predicated on this third company, this third relationship. And so we prefer having that more direct relationship with our customers, which then lets us bring, cost certainty. We can influence the platform, like Taylor said. We'll be bringing GPUs to the OpenCloud platform here in a couple months. So that's what we're really excited about. And I think you mentioned the security side, on the compliance side, which of course is different. We believe we're able to achieve the exact same levels of compliance that we've been able to achieve with the VMware solution. So we're underway with a number of audits right now against the platform, but we don't really see it being any different. And in part, that's because the CloudStack project is 15 plus years old, has hundreds of code contributors, and some of the largest companies in the world who you're not going to find it out there, but they're actually using CloudStack to run their cloud services as well.
Yeah.
That said, we're strong believers in open source, and we'll talk a bit about OpenCloud, which is our sort of main approach to open source today. But we still believe that in certain capacities and in certain areas, commercial virtualization platforms have a place. In the past, that's been heavy on the VMware front. Obviously, VMware's changing not just the partner ecosystem, but how they interact with their customers, and unfortunately, usually in not such good ways. So the good news is with the OneNac acquisition, we're really the second or largest, depending on who you ask, Nutanix hosting provider in the United States. We have a product called ReliaCloud, which is essentially dedicated ReliaCloud clusters, starting at 3 nodes, going all the way up to tens or 20 nodes. for those applications where specifically there's still a lot of vendors who say, hey, if we're going to provide support for this, if we're going to, if it's like Epic, for example, and we have our, report card and we're going to grade you, it has to run in these certain proprietary ecosystems. So we still think that there's a place for it. And again, we're really excited about some of the innovation coming out of the Nutanix platform specifically, and are seeing a lot of growth and take there as well.
Yeah, and then the last column, and a lot of what this, a lot of what we cover today really kind of hits on this one as well. So I won't spend too much time on it. But hyperscalers are friends, not enemies. We, looking at a multi-cloud world, we very much believe that the hyperscalers have a place, right? We have a very established Microsoft practice, and we're going to continue to invest in that and grow it. However, right, if you look at the workloads that live in a hyperscaler, and it kind of gets back into the right workload, right place, there may be opportunities for more performance, more cost efficiencies, better strategy if we look at it not as we need to put everything up into a hyperscaler cloud because that's what we were told for the last 10 years, but instead saying, hey, we have AWS or we have Azure, and it provides a ton of value to our business. But we also have access to OpenCloud. And if we look at the workloads, such as, just VMs that can be really expensive to run, maybe it makes sense to look at bringing those over into OpenCloud or on-prem or colo, right? That strategy paradigm is shifting pretty drastically.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Absolutely. And so I think, with that said, one of the things we wanted to show everybody today, one of the things that we've embraced when it comes to open source is this idea of transparency. So you can go out on the internet and you can actually find our public knowledge base for the OpenCloud platform. There are hundreds of pages of documentation. It is literally the manual for how to use OpenCloud. And it's there and not behind a paywall because we believe that that's the right way to do things. Similarly, Taylor and a couple others internally have been working on a calculator. And the function of the calculator is essentially to provide a transparent way to our current customers, our prospects, yes, maybe our competitors, to really see how OpenCloud stacks up against, the likes of, AWS, Azure, and maybe what you're doing already today in VMware. So I'm gonna have Taylor run through a couple of examples. I think these are basically real examples from customers with some sensitive
yeah.
information so you can see what it really looks like.
Yeah. So are you able to see my screen, David? I
Yeah.
think it. Okay,
Yep.
perfect. So again, we talk about open source and open cloud as alternatives to the hyperscaler, and we start to talk about, a multi-cloud effort and what does that really look like, right? Right? Why would I, as an IT admin, be willing to go through the effort of potentially moving workloads out of, my current strategy? And you never want to, as a sales organization, as a service provider, right? You never say, hey, we're going to lead on, price or anything like that. But a lot of the conversations we have, there's a hurdle of at first it sounds difficult, it's perceived, hey, I'm going from one to multiple. But when you see the comparison of what it would cost to run identical workloads in hyperscalers versus VMware versus OpenCloud, people really start to notice, oh, there are a ton of cost benefits with open source, and there not being, a hypervisor tax or anything like that. So this is what you're seeing here is a cloud pricing calculator that's about to get launched publicly on our website. But in the meantime, if you want to see again what your environment would look like, across the different scenarios, absolutely reach out to David or I and set up a call through our bookings link. But the big thing here is we can take in either an RV Tools export, so if you're coming from VMware, or we can use a Nutanix collector report from their collector tool, feed it in and calculate the pricing, and we really start to see a lot of valuable information. So I'm going to start. I've got an RV Tools export, so I'm going to load that up, calculate my pricing, and we'll see what this comes back with. And I always love doing live demos because especially in a dev environment. But you can see we successfully processed 112 VMs. It's an RV Tools, and let's look at what it came back with. So just out of the gate, if we were to price this out in an AWS or an Azure environment, we can see we're at roughly 32 to call it almost $34,000 a month. And there's a breakdown down here of the sizes chose to get to that price. But the really interesting thing is as you go down the columns, right? VMware Cloud, 25,000. Okay, that's pretty significant, right? We're saving roughly $8,000 to $9,000 a month if we go that route. And then you see OpenCloud, right? And at 14,400 for an identical workload, we have, for this workload, over $200,000 a year of potential savings by moving these VMs out of these clouds into the open cloud environment. And that's really all powered by I'm a big believer of the fact that we use open source technologies and we're able to pass those savings. We don't have R&D costs because the community supports that. We're able to pass those back on to our customers. And then as you look, if you do committed term spends, right, and you said, hey, we're willing to commit to 1 year, 3 year, we start to see additional pricing, and that number drops even further as you go. So very, very powerful when it comes to a cost competitiveness, right? And of course, cost alone is not the only feature. There's all kinds of performance benefits. I think you're going to cover some of the third-party studies that have been done. Yep. But this is a great first step, especially if your organization is looking at what is our cloud strategy. We've been disruptive, or there are organizations that are really just starting out. You're having that conversation with leadership to say, hey, I know budgets are tight right now. They're tight for everybody. If we look at these alternatives to maybe the general, we're going to go to Azure or go to AWS path or VMware, it really starts to open eyes, and you can have that conversation. And then we dive into all the technical benefits and everything else that comes with just being a US Signal product. But it's very powerful. So we look down here, and again, you can see there's different operating system types. So we capture, CPU, RAM, storage, the operating system type, and then we do comparisons across the board of equivalent workloads for AWS, Azure, and then what the VM cloud cost is. You can go through, look at that, down the list, look at it in an aggregate, and share that out. And then we have export to PDF and we have export to Excel. If you want to take those reports and share them throughout your organization. If we look at, again, that was an RB Tools. Let's look at Nutanix Collector. And if I calculate that,
and let me just say something kind of while you're uploading there. So you had referenced a third-party study that we did. So we recognize that OpenCloud is probably new. I mean, it's new to everybody. And so we actually worked with a firm called Cloud Mercado, and these studies are actually available on the website. And marketing can perhaps actually put a link to one of the blogs in the chat. But we paid them to not for the results, but to do the work and to compare us against all of the major competitors from a price and a performance and a mix of price and performance. And when you go and look at it, what you'll see is that we're head and above sort of the competitors in most scenarios. There's some places where we get beat because of
yeah, for sure,
like that. But yeah, just to give you an idea.
Yeah. So again, we've uploaded the Nutanix Collector, 71 VMs, and you can see here, again, a little bit smaller of a deal, but still, almost a third of the AWS cost, right? And so again, really powerful. And the conversations that we're having with our customers that are moving to OpenCloud is, what can you do as an organization with an additional $145,000 a year in your IT budget? What's that mean for security initiatives that we know we need to do, but sometimes maybe get looked over, unfortunately, because the budget's not there? Or we hear about all these different AI initiatives. I'm not going to turn this into an AI webinar. I've done a couple of those separate from this, and we'll continue to do that because it's such a major disruptor in the industry that we need to be talking about it. However, right, we can look at implementing some of those, or we could look at, potentially hiring another individual to come in and help distribute the workload, right? Uh, you really start to have options available to you when you have the opportunity to free up this budget.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Great.
again,
So yeah, we
yeah, just
expect the calculator to be live in 1 to 2 weeks on the website, I think is what you can probably expect. But
yep.
we can share
But
it in the meantime.
again, don't you're not going to waste our time. We would love to talk to you. Please sign up with our bookings links that are going to be available. Reach out on LinkedIn or email. Um, we would love to, run an RB Tools or a Nutanix collector through this calculator, even prior to it going live on the website, and have that conversation.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Taylor. Uh, and now is probably a good time for me to mention something I forgot at the beginning, but I'm sure this last segment here has maybe caused some questions. There is the Q&A option that you'll find in the upper right hand of your screen. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in there, and we will actually have about 15 minutes at the end. Taylor and I will just live take whatever questions you ask us. So be nice, but we'll answer anything. So happy
Be
to
nice to me.
do
Be
it.
mean to David. I'm new in my role.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. All right. So another thing that we want to acknowledge. So we've talked heavy open cloud, and this isn't the open cloud presentation. We're just using that as a way to really describe why we believe open source is a game changer when it comes to cloud strategy. But we can't ignore that there's a lot of movement in sort of the market ecosystem. You can see this quote from or this the stat from Michael Dell, that like 83% of CIOs are planning to move some workloads, not necessarily all, some workloads, repatriate from the public cloud. And Taylor actually, when he first started as the combined organization, had this really interesting idea, which is, we just said that we think the hyperscalers are friends and not enemies, and so we think it makes sense. And by the way, for those that don't know, we do Azure CSP and managed services. We have very, very large customers where we manage their CSP and their managed services in Azure for multi-billion-dollar enterprises. But if you're running virtual machines in that space, like it's not the best place to do it from a SLA perspective, and it's certainly not the best place from a performance perspective. And so Taylor had this thought, which is, what if we use some of the native tools that these hyperscalers they give you. Their Azure Arc is part of the Azure ecosystem. AWS IAM Roles Anywhere is part of the AWS ecosystem, and add OpenCloud where we think it makes sense. So Taylor's going to play a recorded video, no live demo this time, of I think both of these, and so you'll get a sense for basically the ability to manage OpenCloud with these native tools in one pane of glass, essentially.
Make sure I'm not accidentally. Okay. Are you able to see my one single video instance?
Yeah, I can see your whole screen just for the record, but I can see the
The whole
video too.
screen. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fine. Okay.
All right.
So again, to David's point, when US Signal acquired OneNeck, our executives still like to laugh at me because I was only hyperscalers. I was only AWS. I was only Azure. For the last 3 years, I've been nothing but Microsoft. And they started to float out the idea of, hey, we're going to roll out this. We've got this private cloud. What are your thoughts on kind of helping, be one of the leads around, really getting this thing to market? And I think my response was, I'm really good at Microsoft. Please just let me stay in my lane. I have no interest. And uh, and now here we are, right, where that mindset has definitely shifted, and it's because the open cloud platform can do some cool stuff. But regardless, to David's point, as we're looking at this, I was having conversations with people, and if you go into any organization, you go, hey, I know you have invested heavily, heavily, heavily into Azure or AWS or even GCP or whatever it may be, right? And now I want you to move to OpenCloud, that is a private cloud that does IaaS really well, but transparently, we don't have all of the hundreds of services that come with being in a hyperscaler. You get laughed at, and they say no, right? And rightfully so, probably. So, if you start to look at it though, and you go, well, okay, I'm not going to ask you to move everything entirely, But what if there's an opportunity to extend OpenCloud, kind of that plus OpenCloud, or really with what I'm about to show you, it truly is plus anywhere, right? What if we're able to move those workloads out and then manage them from in the in the Azure console, in the AWS console, and we've really started to see some success with that. So I'm going to play this video, and it's kind of choppy, but what you're going to see here, I've got an OpenCloud instance, and I've got a bunch of VMs here, and so I click into, or oh, okay, this is my AWS one. This one's probably a little bit more exciting even, so we'll lead with this one. So, I've got an instance here that is in OpenCloud, and within AWS, you have the ability through cloud, through their native tools to create what is called a trust anchor through a service called IAM Identity and Access Management Roles Anywhere. Creating this trust anchor, I am able to I have to create a private certificate authority, but then I go through and I create my trust anchor that's tied to that private CA, and I'm able to, and then I think my controls kind of block it, but I'm able to create profiles, AWS profiles that manage resource access and tie them to that trust anchor. So you can see here, I have a profile that allows me to do S3 object storage full access. So I come over and I'm in my Ubuntu instance that is within OpenCloud, and AWS has some helpers that you can leverage the trust anchor to create temporary credentials or long term, where this VM can live anywhere and act as if it's within the walls of AWS. So what you're going to see is I'm about to do, for those that don't know, when you do an ls command in Linux, it lists out your files. And so you can see here I ran an AWS S3, so that's the object storage, list out my tokens. I have no access. I'm not able to do this. But as we leverage the trust anchor, and then AWS has a signing helper that we would automate out a lot of this. This is very manual, but we're able to run this, and then you can see here after we run it, we are given credentials temporarily that we can then use for our program to run against. So again, we automate all of this out. There's no manual key management or rotation. It's all handled with the trust anchor and the roles anywhere service. But with those now, you can see when I run that same command, I'm able to go through and interact with S3 as if I was an EC2 instance living within the bounds of my AWS account. So, this one particularly, it gets really powerful as organizations are looking to say, hey, we're in AWS, we've got a bunch of EC2s, they leverage other services. How can we move those to a more cost-effective alternative? So this one, again, we're seeing a ton of interest in this strategy. If we come over here,
Hey Taylor,
really,
can I just insert
yeah,
a question? There was actually a question that came through when we were showing
yeah,
the calculator, and I think
yeah,
now is actually no, it's okay, but I think now is a really good time actually to talk about it. So the question was, when we showed the calculator and you went through and you showed pay-go and you showed these different discounts, the
yep,
calculator today does not show reserved instances in things like Azure or AWS, and
not in the current
not
iteration.
not yet. And so the key thing that I want to make sure is clear to everybody, we're not trying to hide that. We know that those exist. You can go to their calculators and find them. This is version 1 of the calculator, so we could get it out here, but we're going to be adding things like the ability to calculate reserved instances and contracts, the ability, to add virtual desktops and GPUs and a bunch of other stuff as well. But I just wanted to call that out.
Yeah, no, great point. And if you look though at the numbers, important to call out that our comparisons were the pay as you go numbers, right? So I wanted to make sure that we weren't, saying, hey, here's the AWS price, and here's our price, but it's drastically discount because you've committed to a term. The comparisons that I showed were non-commit month-to-month pricing, and they only get better as you go.
Yep.
We run into instances where, smaller deployments, we're kind of on par, or don't beat by as much with some of the AWS or Azure VM sizes, but by and large across the board, we're seeing pretty drastic savings.
Yeah, and as the environments get bigger, the savings also gets bigger, right?
Yes, yeah. The larger we go, the more fun it gets. Um,
For sure.
so. What we're going to show you here, again, it's listing out VMs within an open cloud environment. Same thing. I've got a Windows VM that's deployed on within OpenCloud, and you can go see, the device name that I've got here. So as I go over to Arc, traditional management has you manage VMs from within the virtual machines console. You would manage within the Azure Arc service instead. So you click in there, you go to all your resources, and then we can start to see and manage the VMs that we bring in through the Arc agent. So if I click in here, you can see, hey, the computer name matches. It's a Windows 2022 standard box. You can see the it's Apache Software Foundation with KVM hypervisor, CloudStack KVM hypervisor. And it's being, we're now able to manage this from within the Azure portal. And Arc has a number of things that you can do. So you can manage updates, you can do logging, security policies, or they have kind of a more advanced license where you can even do Windows Admin Center management without needing a VPN or other direct connection, and some site recovery stuff, kind of through the service. But ultimately, this really kind of plays into the idea that OpenCloud can really extend as another region of Azure or of AWS, right? So we would move the VMs over to OpenCloud, we would load up Arc, and then you're able to continue managing updates and policies, again, everything else. And this strategy actually is pretty common, right? This one's not as new. I think the AWS one is a lot more recent of a development, but we've got large and small customers that are leveraging Arc, whether it's through license management or they have, on-prem Windows deployments that they want to manage. And so there's a pretty proven strategy here. And now, you incorporate the open cloud or an open source cloud environment, and you get to take advantage of all of those cost savings. So very, very exciting when you start to leverage these multi-cloud tools. And again, I want to really reiterate, these are first-class supported tools. This is not a third-party tool that we're using here. AWS has, AWS IAM roles anywhere is a first-class tool within their ecosystem. So the environment's there to play nicely together, and make sure that operational overhead is very minimal as we adopt this strategy.
That's right. And I'm gonna preempt a question because I haven't seen it yet, but I know people could be thinking about it, which is, okay, so I have PaaS or other infrastructure in Azure, and I'm gonna run maybe some VMs in OpenCloud, but there has to be likely, depending on the application, there's some data transfer that happens between those two places, and so
Yeah,
you're potentially liable for egress fees, which is true. I don't know that we like have the prescriptive answer, but the way that I think about it is we can leverage relationships with companies like Megaport, who we already have a relationship with, to basically cut out the need for those higher egress fees. So I don't know, Taylor, if you have anything
yeah.
else to say about that, but I just want to call that out.
Yeah, no, it is an important call out, right? Because to your point, if we're going to move you to a lower cost IaaS platform, but then suddenly all the savings are eaten up by high egress fees, right? Why even make the move? So there's a number of strategies. We can look at Megaport. We can look at direct connect and express routes and whatever else maybe. But also, it really starts to get into a conversation around data gravity, right? What applications and the data that they access can move together, right? So if there's an opportunity to bring the app server, an app server and its database over to OpenCloud or your other environment, right? You're going to remove the need to go across the wire. Now, we're not always going to be able to get away with that, right? If we've got stuff that lives up in S3 or storage containers, whatever it may be. But by and large, we're going to make sure that, we kind of take a consultative approach to say, hey, here is kind of the best modeled outcome if we make this move. So
That's right.
you're not going
That's
to
right.
completely get rid of them, but we're not going to sign you up to do something that's going to, show no value, right?
Yeah, that's right. And the key point being we have strategies to mitigate against that risk. And so it's certainly something that we're thinking about as we think of this as a cohesive large ecosystem. So
Yep.
just want to point that out. All right, so I'm going to switch back to sharing my screen here. Um, so the other thing that we thought was prescient when it comes to just this idea of evolving cloud strategies. I don't know about you all, but I've heard this idea of edge computing for like quite a long time. I don't know. It seems like it's been 10 years. And up until maybe recently, it hasn't been entirely clear. Edge has existed already in like hospital systems or where I come from in manufacturing. You tend to have your processing very close to where, in our case, widgets were made. But there's what I think is a persistent need for near edge still in most cloud strategies. And when we think about near edge, that's really thinking about regional data centers that are sub 10 millisecond latency from the place that the data is being consumed or processed. So the interesting thing here to talk AI a little bit is like so that latency sensitivity that's been a challenge forever for all kinds of applications. As things shift from largely training today to largely inference, you can't have the delay that it will take for that application or that maybe it's a piece of medical equipment in a hospital to go out to Microsoft in the nearest zone and then come back to you. That may be too long of a time. And so we think that there's this persistent need for near edge, and a couple things that we're thinking about on the open source front when it comes to OpenCloud is, I mentioned earlier we're reinvesting back into the network. A big part of that is actually going to be growing that network from 100 gig to an 800 gig network, and so really creating the highway of the future for all things AI and really any other thing, if we're being honest. The other thing is I mentioned expansion of data centers, so obviously available power is a big challenge. The hyperscalers have essentially unlimited budgets. The way we approach it is really customer first and where's the need. That's why we're expanding, two facilities, one in Des Moines and one in Detroit. And then, the last thing at least that I would say about this is we're also, Taylor mentioned on the open source side, we're actually contributing to the project by sponsoring the development of native GPU as a service capabilities within CloudStack. That's actually something that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't have made the commitment back to the open source community. And so we're working on bringing those to market this year, as well as actually looking at things like ARM CPUs from Ampere, where they're super high core density, low power, AI optimized CPUs as well. So we're going to have, again, that choose your own adventure optionality. Taylor, any other thoughts on the edge conversation before we talk about just the US Signal leveraging open source?
No, I don't think so. I think you covered it pretty well. I'm excited. If you talk to anybody here at US Signal, I am a huge AI guy. I play with it in the evenings and fine tune models, do all that fun stuff. And so again, kind of tying into the open source, if you look at a lot of how these things are being built, I know it's kind of closed source models, right? Your Frontiers, you got your Open AIs, your Anthropics, and all that. But if you look under the hood at like what they're using to build those LLMs, I mean, it's open source tools, right? TensorFlow and scikit-learn and all that stuff. And so again, open source is deeply rooted in the AI movement and everything else, and it's going to push from training to inference as we actually start to use and adopt this stuff.
That's right. And again, highly biased, but we think the beauty of doing all of this on top of OpenCloud is that we've set this foundation of this, mature, resilient, innovative, cost competitive platform. And so everything that gets built on top of it as a customer becomes that much more economical compared to maybe some of the other alternatives that are out there.
Yep.
So to talk a little bit, I know we've mentioned OpenCloud, and again, this isn't advertising for OpenCloud, but it's how we view open source and where the cloud journey is. some things that we just wanted to share. Taylor and I were thinking about this over the last week or so. Like, what are the key takeaways on the OpenCloud side if you hear nothing else? And so I saw Katie put in the chat the Cloud Mercado study. And so, again, that was a study that we commissioned, had no say in the results. We just paid for the time and got the results as they were. And that really shows, and the calculator shows, up to a 40 to 50% lower cost than public cloud, even taking into account reserved instances and some other things. Another key thing is that idea of freedom from vendor lock-in, and this is persistent, regardless of what open source platform you're talking about. But we really think that in the VMware space and even potentially the Nutanix space going forward, like these are businesses. They're going to go and make changes to their products and charge appropriately for them. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we like the ability to really control the destiny for both us and then also then for our customers, because I think part of being a service provider is not just taking an order from a customer, provisioning the thing they want, and taking their money all the time. It's actually reinvesting that back into figuring out how to do things better. How do you solve this equation more efficiently with less steps? And then, I'll just touch briefly on pricing and resources. On the pricing side, so we don't charge egress fees at all for any of our DIA customers, dedicated internet customers out of the data centers. I would say the other piece here on the predictable pricing models, because this is all based on tools that are open source, yet the hardware underneath is all enterprise. It's Arista spineless switching, it's Dell R650XS compute nodes, it's InfiniDAT, SSA2, all flash arrays. We're able to give you enterprise features without maybe always having to pay that enterprise cost that always seems to go up 10 to 20% a year. And then one of the things that we didn't touch on specifically, but that OpenCloud I think is really exciting about is if you're in a vCloud Director environment today, or even Nutanix, and you need more resources, you have to go through a sales process with your salesperson, or you have to go and acquire another Nutanix node and buy hardware. The really cool thing about OpenCloud is we maintain overhead in the environment. And so if you need to actually go beyond your current steady state need, you just go and provision it, and you make a choice. If your need is temporary and you only need those resources for a week, we'll just charge you the monthly rate for that week, so you pay for the 7 days. And then if you say, well, this is actually a need that I have for the long term, the business bought a new application, you can recontract under a commitment for that delta. We'll give you the money back for the month that maybe you were uncommitted for, and then you move on at the decreased rate. So again, it provides that flexibility if you have seasonal businesses or whatever. And then I think another important thing that we didn't touch on much, because this isn't an IAC talk, is really the cool stuff with IAC and the APIs with CloudStack. So Taylor, I know you get excited about this stuff. So
Yeah, again, I said at the beginning, I come up through a developer background, a cloud architect background, and through that, always, one of the reasons I really enjoyed working within the hyperscalers was because everything was API first, or you could leverage Terraform or their own native infrastructure as code, and so developing through the years, there were opportunities to work with private clouds, and myself and teams I was on, we always kind of veered back to the public cloud because we really wanted to work in a very programmatic style. Infrastructure as code, kind of the DevOps mentality provides a number of benefits outside of having to manually go deploy and click every single time, right? You get consistency. You're able to test against the environment. You're able to audit what was done in a pretty easy fashion that you just lose if you're going in and manually creating every time. And so again, even when at the beginning of the US Signal, acquiring OneNeck, and they said, hey, do you want to kind of move outside of the Microsoft world, right? I'm like, no, because I'm not really a private cloud guy. And OpenCloud, then, when I finally got to sit down and get my hands on it, I realized, oh, hey, this is private cloud, but because it's built on the open source project CloudStack, which it was brought to market or brought to the world kind of as a response to AWS's EC2 deployment style for organizations that said, hey, for whatever reason, we can't or won't work with AWS, but we want that capability, right? We get to take advantage of that. And because it's modeled after EC2, everything is API first, and I can write code to script my deployments, and I can do everything, from a DevOps perspective in this environment that, uh, that I could do in the hyperscalers and I couldn't do with other private clouds. And so, I've talked to a lot of software consulting firms, development shops, and started floating this around. And the number one thing I heard is we're open to private cloud, but we won't because we can't automate everything. And now, leveraging open source, we didn't have to pay to build that feature set ourselves. It's available. We're really starting to see adoption in a wide array of features and deployments being brought to the platform.
And I think it's fair to say, I mean, Taylor in his work experience is not dissimilar to new developers or admins or analysts that are coming into any of your organizations. And that is that they all have these free Azure credits and AWS credits, and there's a program there. And guess what? They do this for a reason, because they know that that drives the consumption of their infrastructure. But the point is that they're deploying infrastructure primarily as code. They're not logging into the OpenCloud GUI and spinning up a virtual machine and configuring it. You could do that with OpenCloud. Whereas vCloud, it has APIs. They're not great. We've had customers that have tried maybe unsuccessfully to use those to do that kind of thing. This is just, it's native and really how it works.
Yeah. No, I mean, that the education standpoint is a great point, right? I mean, I'm now, oh gosh, a decade plus since I've was in school. And even at the time, my classes really started pushing, hey, we're going to deploy into, AWS because we get so many of these education credits and all of that. Talking to students now, I mean, that's just the default, right? And so, you hire somebody out of school or to come join your team, and they may have never even seen VMware, right? Or any of these platforms, but they can tell you back of their hand how to deploy something within, Azure, right? And so I think there's a major shift happening in the job market as well.
Absolutely. And then, the last point here, which, we put on any one of our products and services because we believe strongly in, the support experience, our customer relationships. Like, that's really what drives, it drives what Taylor and I do. We wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the opportunity to work with our customers. And so it's really still, I mean, we get all these great things. You can still call a 1-800 number or email an email account, and you can still get somebody that can help you and answer your phone call in 30 seconds or less that you may have met in the, in the near past. So, we wrap that all with the included, no additional charge, US Signal support. So
I think
with that said,
we went about 10 minutes longer than I think we'd originally thought, but I think that's actually pretty good. So
we did. And the key thing is there were some questions that came in. We answered all of the questions that have come in so far. So we don't have any outstanding Q&A. Although if there are questions, we have 5 minutes. So we're happy to, if you put them in chat, we can definitely take a look at them. But just in terms of like next steps and what we, hope you got value out of the last 55 minutes with us. 3 kind of brief things we're just asking for. When this session ends, GoToWebinar is going to pop up a quick few question survey. There's a box there if you want to put feedback or additional questions. Maybe you want to have more a one-on-one nuanced conversation around how does this compare against reserved instances, for example. Like, we're happy to dive into that for you. And then it helps give us feedback as well for the future. The second thing is there are meeting links for both Taylor and I in the chat. They may get sent out after as well, but feel free to book time with us as much time as you need. We're happy to help. And again, no obligation.
Doesn't even need to be about today, right? Like, if you just want, David and I are accessible. So if you have anything US Signal related, don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, that's right. I completely agree with that. And then again, that calculator will be live on the website in a week or two. We're just finalizing some final things to get it there. And then the last bit will be marketing will be sending a follow-up with a link to the recording, so you'll have the content that we shared with you today. So I don't think there's any additional questions based on what I saw. So just want to say, Taylor, by the way, thank you. Congratulations on your new role. Super stoked for you. And appreciate everyone else's time today.
No, I agree. Thank you everybody for taking the time, and we're excited to talk to you further.
Awesome. Thank you.